So it seems that my game dev journey is about to end, and this is as good as time as any to talk about my experience as a full-time developer over the past few years. Maybe someone will find it useful. As a disclaimer, I wanted to mention that I didn't go blindly into this. I had some experience, some skills as a self-taught person, which is really important to emphasize. Emphasize the fact that I'm not a programmer, more of a designer, which is often frowned upon in industry. And let's just say that the circumstances that encouraged me to embark on this journey were not necessarily the most optimal conditions. The same type of existential struggle I'm facing right now. But that's another story for another day. So prior to this, I've been honing my skills as far as I can remember. Thought to mention that some of the skills aren't related to game dev, but play an important role in the grand scheme of things, as gaming changed me and sort of morphed me to the person who I am today. So it played an important role in my life. So in a way, I never really wanted to embark on this journey, especially as a solo developer, but I always had an interest in making games, which encouraged me to try things out like modding, making textures, models, and whatnot back in the day, which sort of kept on motivating to do more. And there was even a point in my young years where I came close to be part of a team, to start actually working on games, but life had better things to do. The reason why I'm mentioning this is prior to going full time, I've tried to look for a job in the industry with my small portfolio at the time. It was all about writing in any shape or form, like copy or social media presence. Funny thing is that one of the times when I was applying for a storytelling position, a recruiter missed the fact that I'm not a resident and wanted to invite me for an interview. This was at a well known and established UK based studio. They ghosted me soon after I told them what they've missed. But I was confident that I'd be able to at least start somewhere. And because I didn't have a choice, because my life was a disaster even back then, I tried my best to reach out to whomever I could. The reality was that junior positions were far in between, especially in the area I was applying to. It quickly turned out that whatever I wanted, will never be able to do. This extends to all other positions I've tried to secure, like being a receptionist. Solely because where I'm at, the industry technically does not exist, and the opportunities closest are all abroad. And because I was a nobody with a portfolio that was okay-ish, but had no commercial games in, with no connections in the industry, so there was no way that someone would hire me, regardless of what my portfolio was or not. Of course, it wasn't up to specs as well, as you could imagine. So that was a sobering nightmare to wake up from. I could go into a long tangent about this, how I went into extreme length to ensure the best side of me, working on projects, even with teams, but that wasn't enough at all. So I came to the realization that the only way, the one and only way, is going to be if I make it on my own. No help, with nothing. Usually devs recommend to have years worth of savings way before thinking of attempting such a venture. Thing is that life isn't as rosy for everyone and you either take your chances or not. And it turned out that after almost 2 years struggling to find a position, a sort of opening came in the form of the tools that I'm using currently. Because one of the biggest problems I had back in the day was not just the technical issues to overcome, but the ways to monetize this whole venture. Tried multiple sources, Patreon, Ko-fi. None worked because I had no audience nor a way to build one. An unexpected change came around the pandemic when Epic decided to change how they monetize their engine, which gave me the opportunity to actually go beyond hobby projects and maybe make a living out of it. The problem at the time, hindsight, was that I had no idea how difficult this would be. Not in terms of making games, as I knew how hard it was, but getting people on board, reaching out to them, and this wasn't just my limit of the 2000 Aero graphics, but the platforms I use. There were and still are insurmountable problems that I simply cannot overcome because having no money to do so. So when getting into this, basically I had most of the knowledge to start somewhere. I knew what engines were, how to make basic assets, how the whole development process occurred, what were pipelines, what tools to use, and what kind of projects I could tackle on my own. Again, I want to emphasize that this wasn't necessarily a good financial decision, but I had no other option. So either this or nothing. And I wanted to do something with my life to get out of this monstrous nightmare I've been sitting in. So I jumped right in with whatever I had. Right at the beginning, I clearly understood that I wouldn't be able to compete on the market. Simple things you take for granted, like dynamic lighting or particle effects. The only option at the time I thought was to make a mobile game, because of the requirements were so outdated that I could make use of it. That is when my first project was born, which took around a year to complete. Unfortunately for me, I couldn't release it, because around 1 or 2 months before release, the war in Ukraine started and punched currencies in the face. The perfect storm hit. My phone broke, I couldn't pay voice actors, and Google decided that the version I'm using is no longer supported, and I was stuck there because I could not upgrade. The mobile market is already quite difficult to get into because you need to have a lot of money to advertise yourself. My plan was to slowly build up a portfolio, credibility as you may. So all I really wanted is to build my image, to start small and then scale up. But when all this happened at the right moment, it technically axed my project. And I looked everywhere where I could at the time to push the project through the finish line. It was not easy to let go because of the time and effort that took making it. For example, the background in the game took over 2 weeks to do because of how slow my system is. I was working with volumetrics for making a cube map, often not knowing what the results will look like after 10-15 minutes at a time. So half of the work was guessing in the dark. But I pushed through, dealt with it, and tried my best to squeeze out every inch of performance I could. And it was okay for a mobile, I thought, especially for a first commercial project, on a very tight budget. What followed after just got worse. Before that, I worked 10-12 hours and crunched, but when this project failed to ship, it solidified my notions that I might not be good enough for this, whatever I do, however I do it, and I need to be better in every possible way, which is fine because I always strive to be the best in the things that I love to do. Important distinction here, very important. Yes, and I have very high standards, even though people often laugh at me for it, because which is a recurring theme I encounter from people in my life. If you can't make money out of it, you're a nobody. Technically nothing to show for myself. If you don't know where to look. But at that moment I was quite afraid because I had no idea what to do next. The market is brutal. Even as an indie, the expectations are so high and so unrealistic that I really doubted that I could live up to it with whatever I had. So the cycle began. I came up with a project which usually took, 6 to 8, maybe 12 months to get to a position where I could present it to someone. You can imagine that it wasn't near a polished vertical slice, but it was something. It was always something, a prototype that someone could look at. And my goal was with all these projects to hunt for a publisher because I knew I needed tools to be able to compete on today's market. Because the first thing they see whenever you post your game is how it looks, how it sounds, what are the mechanics, is it fun, etc. And if it doesn't look like $1,000,000, might as well flush yourself down the toilet. Generalizing here, as genre, audience, and so forth play a huge role, but first impressions really matter a lot. It's very rare that a bad-looking game makes the rounds, especially on a tight budget or if you have no budget at all. On social media, what counts is execution, which often entails polished visuals, design, and well-thought-out aesthetics. But it didn't matter how many publishers I reached out to, how many projects I've done. Nobody cared. I've experienced the same thing others do, being ghosted all the time. Which is fine. Not everyone can reply to every submission. That's fine. What rubbed me the wrong ways a couple of times that when I was in a conversation with someone, they just suddenly stop without a trace. Reasons ranged from "this guy must be joking" to "we forgot to look at your project" and "we've already booked 2 years in advance," etc. And those who were kind enough to reply or took their time gave me all sorts of reasons. The budget is too low. The budget is too high. The team count is too low. These were all red flags that I knew I had because I had no commercially viable games in my portfolio. Because I had none. I had prototypes and small project, but that was it. I was a nobody. I am still a nobody. Because for one reason or another, I still have yet to actually publish a complete game that is commercially successful, so I can be accepted in the industry as a somebody. Turns out that's a huge problem. Even nobody cares if you have an idea or a prototype. If you're nobody, have no connections, if you cannot show what it would look like, the final product that is, then there's no chance for you. This comes way before tackling the issue if you fit a publisher's portfolio or not. But I have a bone to pick on chasing perfect vertical slices. It makes sense from an investor's point of view, where you have 5 minutes to impress someone at a presentation. Think Shark Tank. But as a solo developer, the effort to get there means that a partial game has to be completed, all the logic, the assets, etc., which equals to the amount of work of months/years often. And at that point, I might as well finish the game myself. And over here, there are no grants, no VCs, no publishers I can reach. And I was told as well by a boutique publisher who almost signed me as of late. Other reason nobody ever took interest in my project was that I live far away from the West. On top of meeting expectations. And there's a huge list of expectations you have to fulfill. Wrong genre, has no co-op, it's not multiplayer. The list goes on and on. It comes a point when it just becomes an excuse to get rid of you. Because there are hundreds or even thousands to choose from. Way better, way larger teams. Studios, actual studios, churning out games by the day. Essentially saying that they can cherry pick what projects to take under their belt and only touch the best of the best that are ready to go. The more investment, the more obscure a project is, the less chance of being heard and taken seriously. It's quite simple. They are just pleasing the board of directors. They want their money back. They want their interest. They're not looking to invest in something that they won't get their money back, which is fine. Investment works like this. Problem with this is I found that most of the time the people I've spoken to and who took somewhat of an interest in my projects, referring to speaking to a publisher, had no idea how games were made. I've met a couple of developers, but that was it. I can count that on my one hand out of hundreds. Most of them were best gamers. I'm not a professional, I'm not saying that, but at least I have some vague idea of how games are made, what the technical difficulties are. This becomes an issue when decision makers judge based on their narrow view of reality and greenlit projects that are pleasing first and delivering later. The reason why I'm mentioning is that most of my projects were not even evaluated. They were tossed into the bin right away because they didn't look what they were expected to. Even at publishers that thrived to help solo developers such as myself. Was thinking of Epic here and their lopsided grant program, but of course the true answer will never be relieved. These were my educated guesses. And when you present a prototype, it is called a prototype, not a perfect vertical slice with all the mechanics, the beautiful looks, and etc. etc. I always try to be realistic about getting funding for all my projects, keeping the scopes tight, because I knew I've been fighting an uphill battle, because I had to prove. And to this day, I couldn't prove that I'm capable of doing what I am trying to do. And I really didn't understood what was the problem, what was the main reason why I wasn't being able to do anything that would at least spark some interest. Apart from the obvious that I came to the conclusion that I'm not meeting the visuals, the mechanics are not good, it's not fun, etc. etc. But some of the values I found did not match up with what I've experienced. There was this disconnect, what I thought was going on and what they were telling me. So I asked around to get a better picture of what was truly going on. Was it me or was something else? This will come back again, but I'm not here to shift the blame. A lot of things were at stake, but putting all the blame on me felt unreasonable. And if we look at it from a materialistic point of view, the numbers when they manage to show up shows sparks of interest, creating likes, comments, etc. So I must be doing something more than generating garbage, was my thinking. So that got me thinking to try to figure out why publishers try to play it safe. So the conclusion I came up with, most of the publishers have no idea what they're doing. It might sound a bit bold, I understand that. But when everyone doing the same thing, it gets you thinking that what values are they trying to strive for? This topic often comes up in dev circles. Making games is not like selling eggs or steel. So games don't have intrinsic value on their own. And I've been fighting this whole approach of values for a long time now. But blogging and writing comments, videos can only take you so far because I'm just one person. And nobody cares. There was a discussion not long ago where I mentioned that we as creators might not necessarily come to terms with the fact what we want to do might not please others. People have widely different opinions of what fun is, what entertainment is. People have lives to live, not necessarily have the time to enjoy what you wish to present to them. Most can be happy with whatever they can find. And it's kind of saddening that the values I'm trying to uphold to bring value, discussion, to create things that moves people, that make people think, is not something that most would like to see. And I've analyzed this a couple of times in the past to see what was wrong with my approach, what I could have done differently. And at first I thought maybe my ideas were wrong, maybe I could tweak it, maybe I could learn more, doing things what others do, maybe I wasn't unique enough, which is kind of true because there's at least a couple thousand in the world sharing my same views, referring here to the fact that there are probably quite a few out there wanting to do the same thing as I did. But none of it mattered in the grand scheme of things, because I couldn't make it work. And the constant crunch, the working late, doing anything but working, has destroyed me. It has eradicated a part of me. Making games as a solo developer is not easy. If you don't have the funds, everything relies on you. Every problem depends on you being able to solve it. And when I came up with these projects, fishing for a publisher, I had no time to lay back and give my best side. I had no time, and I had to come up with everything on the spot, which is why pre-production is highly underrated. When you're in the zone, you don't have time to think about design decisions to make. It's best to have it laid out before, slight adjustments, if you are on a tight schedule. I can tell you a number of times it has held me back because I had to stop and do something that I normally should not have, figure out a problem that could have been solved before. This not knowing what to do in the near future encouraged me to think outside of the box and make my games modular, because I had no idea what the future will hold and what system needed to be integrated into each other. So as time went on and I've reached out to publishers, they didn't want my projects. Some were interested, but not up to the point that it would end up in a contract. I tried harder each time to make sure I'm coming up with something unique, something fun, something that people would want. Traditional wisdom says to do games you wish to play, as those are the most unique. Not chasing trends or wishing to fulfill someone else's shoes, which is mostly true when you know what you're doing. Many devs fall into the trap of making a game they solely can enjoy, but not others. But here my goals were to convince a publisher to fund my next project, so I had to do what they wanted. But that wasn't enough as well. I've tried small budgets, big budgets, small games, medium games. None of it was enough. It did not matter who I was reaching to. I was still treated as disposable garbage with my dinky ideas. Everyone was laughing at me, not just in the industry, around me. I'm a clown at best at this point. There was a hot moment where I stopped making games and I focused on one thing to prove that I can make a AAA asset, which I spent on almost 9 months. And it's still not the best I can make, but the tools I have limits my ability to do things. It's really difficult to convey to someone. It's not your skills that are hurting you, it's the tools that are using. But nobody cares if you don't have the proof in the form of a complete game, but it might as well shouldn't exist. There are hard rules you cannot abide to. To be honest, it's an approach I'm not in agreement with, but that's another story. The other thing that was interesting to learn the hard way is how marketing worked. Whatever you post online disappears instantly if you don't have the following or the luck to get picked up by the algorithm. The good example would be the hashtag #PGAGame event, where hundreds of devs pitch their games on social media. I've run a test and found out during the last event that participating in the event yielded less interactions as regular posts because of how much noise there was. There are very few places as well where you can advertise yourself, and most of those places are filled with devs or enthusiasts, which most of the time translates to the fact that they are not the target audience. You might get likes, you might get views, but at the end of the day, it won't transform into something more concrete. It won't materialize in purchases. And there's this whole stigma in the community of what making games should look like. People like me shouldn't be in it. I'm not a programmer. I'm using visual scripting, for God's sake. Being dramatic here, visual scripting is perfectly fine. It's just a high level of programming language that has its own limitations. you can still make games with it if you know your limits. And also there's this myth of meeting expectations, which I've mentioned before, which is true in one hand, but on the other, execution matters more than what looks are, if you can find the right place to show it to. Which drives me to another problem, is the fact that small games in today's economy just doesn't cut it. Referring to the PC market here, especially Steam. They always say that you need to have a unique selling point, what differentiates you from competitors. The problem with this is, as you might have guessed, that the more complex you make a game, the more time it needs, the more effort, the more disciplines. Which is also why it was so difficult at times to let go a project, because I've always made everything from scratch. I didn't have the money to buy assets, even use free ones, for the sole reason that mixing and mashing is much more time consumable than just making it on your own. Plus, there's the fact that flexibility is often not included across the board. And learning to animate, to texture, to rig, do sound effects, to music, to make the mechanics, to code, to design, everything takes time and an effort to do, which can be fun, but under these circumstances were often quite a drag, because I had no time and I had to do the best I could. I read tales about this over the years, how some certain developers ended up in hospital because of their gruesome reality. Now I know why. When you post something online and it gets no views, and you do this over and over again in hopes that someone somewhere will pick it up, find something that resonates with you, is often just a myth. That each and every person you see, there's like 1,000 others that you don't. Referring here to the successful games you come across online, it's just survivorship bias. Those who make it to the top is just the less 1%. The rest gets buried. This is one of the reasons why you see the questions in their forums that why a certain game managed to fail expectations. It looks nice, the mechanics are okay, but it has no downloads, no views, nothing. Why did it fail? Maybe not the right time, it wasn't advertised, who knows? Because only a few can make it to the top. The rest usually flies under your radar. A lot can go into this, and you have to think about this as well. And when I started this, I had to have a business mindset. I'm not just a developer, I'm a business owner, a marketing agent, a manager, and everything in between, because I have a product that I wish to sell and build a name for myself. Which brings to me the other issue I kept on having, is the fact that I wasn't being able to release on Steam. Was a bit grim here, as most of the times you can at least pinpoint a couple of things that contributed to the demise of a project. It partially has to do with the fact that it's quite expensive to do where I live. Even though I'm living in the EU. It's just an impossible feat to achieve. People don't understand why this is a big problem, why Steam has this massive advantage over others. Because if it's not on Steam, then your game is dead. Even with my latest project right now, I've gotten complaints about the fact that it's not on Steam. Why is it not on Steam? I've tried to search for it. How can I wishlist it? And my answer is always, I cannot afford it. And it shows that even though it's on itch, it's really a measurement of is your project worthy of being sold for money and not just a hobbyist project in someone's basement, which is compounded on top where I live as the cost of owning and running a business and making a profit has killed the industry in the 2010s and is getting worse. It doesn't get anything. Nobody buys on itch, apart from a few, because the wallets of PC gamers, the market I was aiming for, is on Steam. Much like the requirements for mobile gaming, there are certain requirements you have to meet when you're trying to make a game for PC. Certain genres won't work, certain aesthetics won't work, especially if you don't know what you're doing. And when I started this whole journey, and I thought I had at least some form of understanding of what could be good and what not. So over the years I've tried to look into what the problems could be, only to find out that maybe it's not all on me. I'll pop up some quick statistics here, not much but something. Even though I've been told that I have no place here, I have nothing to show, I should give up. But I was vindicated, especially from a recent publisher who almost signed a contract with me. It was a month-long correspondence that even had a 2-hour-long FaceTime at the very end, and things were looking smooth. But indeed, that's not the issue here, which was a relief to be candid, but not as much as I hoped for. The reason why I started to make games, where I started to tinker with them back in the day, was the sole fact that I was missing something. I was looking for something that wasn't there. Was looking for depth, meaning well executed games that could go beyond their limits and not the binary approach in design I saw. And other practices that are now mainstream in the industry as it got more corporate. I'd like to make stories, like Tolkien, create music like Mozart. These all sound silly, but these are aspirations I'm thriving for. And in a way, I can prove it that I can do it. Wouldn't say any of this if there weren't a good reason. I'm just tired of being ridiculed, shamed, and ignored as an artist because art has no merit and best a hobby. The issue here is that what I can produce, be it music or modeling or whatever, is often masked behind the numerous limits, except for writing, which I was praised sometimes, like how I could turn a boring setting into something captivating, and can be only understood by someone who can see the potentials underneath. Say I've composed a fantasy score last time in a hurry, anyone can listen to it, with a fairly restrictive sound library, which had these passages that would have sounded great normally in a classical orchestra, but were flattened out due to not having the right tools. It had a story to tell, but most would just hear music, not the underlying intentions and themes, something that a professional can recognize right away. Just nobody cares, nobody believes in me, because I have nothing to show apart from a handful of prototypes and smaller projects. This is one of the reasons they usually say whenever you embark on a journey as a solo developer, you need to have the funds to do whatever, however you do it. And that was the thing that I've tried to achieve, to get the tools that I needed to in order to make something decent. And provide the time and space for doing so. Not just because where I live, but for the future of my ventures. As you can imagine, being solo isn't my goal for eternity. Something that will stand the test of time. And it turns out, other devs, people, sort of share some of my views as well. So I'm not a total lunatic thinking about these aspirations after all. It just struck me a bit weird that some of my projects that I've sent to publishers were not always instantly rejected. I could tell who downloaded them, who visited my page. And there were some buzz around those, but I never got any kind of feedback that would reassure me that I was on the right path. Why would they? That's not their responsibility. But I really thought that it would go somewhere. Especially those who seek to help people like me. But it's a huge red flag if you're a solo developer. Which is why I always try to be realistic about things. To make sure whatever I put down the table has a solid reasoning behind it. The last two projects I had came from years of experience mixing and matching different kinds of mechanics. They didn't come out of the woodworks. I planned them. I've tested them. I've made prototypes. Even now, when I was looking for assistance to put my game on Steam, I was hinted at that I'm an idiot for not working on one of my earlier prototypes, because the idea is that good that it could actually make you big money. It came from the mouth of the publisher I was talking to, so there's that. Their reasoning was that it's in a popular genre. What I wanted to achieve looked interesting. The TLDR version would be that the project that was supposed to be this cozy/casual fantasy RPG adventure about a dwarf who was cast into the mines for treason, and for the first time I thought to explore what people were they, because usually you don't get that far with dwarves especially. And I wanted to break the mold from the traditional stereotypes, something I've always thrived to, bringing new perspectives and trying to be different, and oppose the notion that they solely live underground and are greedy, all packed in a world where we get lost by the intrigue, with a heavy focus on exploring the culture, the people, ourselves, understanding the basics of the world, with my signature storytelling of mystique and maturity, epic soundtrack, hand-painted styles are akin to WoW and Dota 2, tactile features, both mechanical as in ease of access and interaction like building or crafting, and a bunch of unique things like having no XP for progression, which was set in an interconnected world, and how it was a blend of genres. It was an ambitious 2 to 3 years worth of project, for the very least, with some additional contract work. However, unexpectedly I was repeatedly encouraged to work on it, but I cannot because of the tools and location, which was something always brushed off by others, that those were just minor bumps on the road. They are definitely not. The current one I made out of spite, enforced by my technical limitations. The reason why it is a one-room game, because I've been fighting the lighting situation I had. Unreal Engine 4 doesn't have global illumination by default, especially not for one for full production and low-end hardware. The gorgeous games you saw back in the day all had custom solutions and tricks up their sleeves to fake it, before ray tracing became a mainstream thing on video cards. So I was stuck with this outdated dynamic shadow system, which looked something like from the 2000s, either harsh pure black shadows or a slightly transparent one. So this time, reluctantly because making shaders in blueprints are expensive and on performance, have come up with a shader that could work in certain situations. But because it's one room, I could limit the things that you could see so it doesn't make too much of a difference. I can mask it. But because it's not unique enough, it really didn't go anywhere. I guess one of the hardest part of all of this is not just the crunch, but this whole notion of proving everyone else. I never imagined that it would be this difficult to do. Which is fine, I like a challenge, because solving problems is the thing that I most enjoy, which is 99.9% of what making games are as well. But I thought it would end up somewhere, not in a failure, doing it full time. I thought I would be more appreciative of it. That I could say at least I tried. And as I mentioned, this was not my first try. Not in this extent, but it was slow going. I always thought that I could organically create an audience, which never happened. It's not just the limitations that I had to work with, it's the way I had to present it. As you know, making games is quite boring, and there's not a lot that you can show at a time. Some people can pull it off with certain genres, but most of the time it is quite boring. And the places like YouTube, where you can upload a video to share your journey, hinges upon the fact that if someone does not get interested in your video in the first few hours after release, it gets buried and you can do nothing about it. That's the reason why most of my videos get only 5 to 10 views. You not just need to create entertaining videos, but have to have a regular schedule doing so if you wish to utilize YouTube in any shape or form. Which is why devs on YouTube are more content creators than not, because most of the time is spent on making videos rather than on their game. Because the way it counts engagement is crucial for the life of the video. And if it doesn't get pushed, then you are dead. Nobody cares. And in a way, you are competing not just with others, but yourself. Because you can easily get into this vicious cycle of trying to be better at what you do. And if all you see is nothing, then you start to question what's wrong and what's not, which can get out of hand really quickly. And just like before, I always try to save whatever project I had. I went out beyond my ways to make sure I've reached out to everyone. There were times where I was even scrutinized for this, for having the nerve to reach out to some certain people, because who I was. I'm a nobody. How dare I? How dare I trying to make a difference? And the funny thing is that people know this. They want more, they want something different. And not everybody needs to like the things you make, which is something that most people often forget about. That's why uniqueness usually gets buried, because it's not trendy. It's not the most safest bet. But making games is not just a bet. It's a multidisciplinary media, where all things come together, like nothing else. I just wish small teams, small devs, would have more ways to get into this, and not necessarily need to rely to appraise someone and their values and whatever they're after. But unless if you're a name in the industry, you will have to face the realities of how difficult it is to make it. So in the case I've left out something you wish to hear about, I'm more than happy to answer. Maybe do a follow-up video if it gets to that, because I've rambled long enough, I assume. So thank you for watching, and hopefully you found something interesting, and maybe you could avoid my mistakes in the future. Thank you and take care. Bye.